It's a heavenly parchment, unknown substance. No one knows the language. It's secret. But believe it, because if you don't, you're screwed. By the way, please give us your money to help us build more churches. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into it today about Medjugorje. You can see no green screen today. This isn't a background I've chosen. I'm kind of getting sick of the green screen. Thought I'd go with my natural habitat here. You can see my workout stuff behind me, my crucifix on the wall, my electrical panel, and luckily my shoulders are covering a bunch of dumbbells and random things on the floor back there, so I look a little bit more civilized. But nonetheless, this is me in all my glory. This is where I usually do my shows. I just took the green screen down. Kind of getting sick of it, to be honest. The lights in my face are really bright and whatever. Anyway, we're going to talk about Medjugorje. I'm going to go behind a paywall about minute 15, 20 or so. We'll see where it goes. We're going to talk about the fruits, the signs, and sort of the secrets of Medjugorje and why it's all insane. To be honest, when you go through it, it seems kind of like Mormonism. There's a parchment with an unknown language that is only known to the one seer, and language experts had to, read it to figure out what it was and whatever. And it's like Joseph Smith. Even the idea that there are 10 secrets, it's muddled to try and even figure out what they are. And the fruits of Medjugorje, people constantly point to the fruits and they'll say, what about the fruits? Well, we're going to go over this notion of fruits in the first part of this podcast and get into some of them before we go behind a paywall. So if you hear the rest of it, you can become a subscriber at my Substack, meretradition.substack.com. Link for that in the description box underneath. Also, YouTube members will get the full video as well. Now, I'm going to be going through information today from a book called Medjugorje, The First 21 Years by Michael Davies. You can see it here on the screen. This is the book. Go to Aruka Press. I'll put the link for that down below as well. Aruka Press, Medjugorje, First 21 Years. And you guys all know my favorite living scholar is probably Dr. Kwasniewski. You can see he did the forward there. Great stuff. And little known secret, not a secret Medjugorje, if you use your iPhone, probably on Androids as well, and you kind of take a picture of text, you can actually copy and paste that text. So I've actually got a lot of the text ready for you on the screen. I'm going to show you that in the Google Docs so we can go through that together so you can see what I'm saying. Michael Davies, amazing, incomparable traditional Catholic scholar, defended Archbishop Lefebvre and so forth over the years and tradition in general. Wonderful scholar. I think when he passed away, Ratzinger called him a great defender of the faith. Something like that. So, man, trads and non-trads see this man as just a great defender of Catholicism. And this is a book that he put together. It's important to note, too, Michael Davies, his wife was Croatian, so he was actually at the forefront of a lot of this because in the beginning in the 1980s and early 90s, before obviously there was internet, he was just getting original documents from Croatia and his wife was translating them for him. And he was communicating with the bishops of the area that were condemning the apparitions and still have never to this day actually said the apparitions are legit. And so he was getting firsthand information before it was cool, if that makes sense. So he was kind of at the forefront. So he was a really unique position. All right. So one of the things you'll hear about Medjugorje is, what about the fruits? Well, let's go to the Bible first to see what they're saying. People say, by their fruits you shall know them. The fruits of Medjugorje are amazing. We're going to go into why they're not. Just some of them. There's so many of them. And but we need to understand this notion of fruits because a lot of people are confused about this. They'll talk about the fruits of the charismatic renewal, the fruits of the Novus Ordo, the fruits of the new springtime, the fruits of Vatican II, the fruits of Medjugorje, fruit, tutti frutti. But there's more to it than just this idea that because something that seems good to me happened, therefore is a fruit. We're going to pull up the scriptures here to look at what Christ actually says about this. We're going to break that down before we get into it because it's important to understand the context. Okay, so here's the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7. This is the main sort of discourse on fruits, one of the most popular ones from the scriptures. Here's Christ saying, beware of false prophets. This is the beginning of fruits. Okay, so verse 16 has to be taken into consideration with verse 15. So we don't just go, by their fruits you shall know them. It's, what is he talking about? Well, it's about false prophets. You can see here. Beware of false prophets. On the screen here, I've just highlighted it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in the clothing of sheep, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. This applies perfectly to what's happened in Medjugorje, as we'll see with how the priests have acted. We're not even really going to get in today the way that the lay people have acted. I mean, we're talking about fraud and immorality and just insane stuff. But anyway, by their fruits, so again, false prophets, by their fruits you will know them. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, and the evil tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can an evil tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth forth not good fruit, or bringeth not forth good fruit, shall be cut down and shall be cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits you shall know them. So, Christ is talking about the fruits. It's in the context of false prophets. Evil trees bring forth evil fruits. Good trees bring forth good fruits. But there's an important passage here that people kind of skip over a lot, or maybe they're not really knowledgeable of this. I'm going to tell you a quick story about why I actually understand what this means outside of any sort of biblical training. I'll show you here. He says here, do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Why is that so important? Well, years ago, I was at a winery with some friends, and I had the pleasure of making wine growing up with my no-no, God rest his soul. Shamefully, I didn't pay as much attention as I should have to be able to do it from rote memory. So if I were to make it now, I'd probably just have to watch a YouTube video and do it in a more modern way, if I'm being honest. But in any event, if you have a Italian grandfather or Portuguese or something like that, you've probably done something like this or something similar, whether it was wine or some other preserve or liquor or something. And I also lived in Italy as a child, as I've said many times, and I actually was very lucky because my mother's family, her aunts and uncles and so forth, lived a very traditional life. You know, my one great uncle was actually an olive cultivator. You know, he made olive oil from his own olive grove, and it was amazingly delicious stuff. It was very different than stuff in the grocery store, and it was like liquid gold. And I remember being there as he's harvesting it and so forth. Her other uncle had a vineyard, and he would produce a ton of wine and sold some, but it wasn't like massive commercial, but, you know, the big vats and things like that. He was sort of the steward of a land, sort of a hangover from the kind of the old sort of feudal system. So there was sort of the landowner, and he had his sort of what we would call today something like a hobby farm on it, and he had a vineyard and so forth. And I was there for the harvest and helped and cultivated the grapes and harvested the grapes and so forth, and was there for the process and so forth. So I actually got to see this stuff firsthand. And one of the things you learn about these fruits, the grapes and the figs. So, you know, the fruits in Italy are very similar. I mean, it's a Mediterranean landscape. They're very similar to those in the Levant, where Christ is talking about. And I was at this vineyard, this winery, a few years ago with a friend, and this winery was only a couple years old at the time. And my friend said to me, we had this tour from the sommelier. And my friend said to me, this vineyard was in Ontario, it wasn't in Italy. And my friend said to me, I wonder, you know, how basically he said something like, wow, it's only been open for 2 years. And I said, yeah, I wonder where they got the grapes from, because they have to be about 50 years old or more before they can start making wine. And he said, that's impossible. They've only been planted here for 2 years. So he raised his hand and he asked, when were these vines planted? And the sommelier said, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but just before it opened. And he looked at me kind of like, haha, gotcha. And then the sommelier jumped in and said, but they were about 50 years old and we brought them over from France. And I looked at him and he sheepishly smiled at me. For the first 50 or 60 years of these types of plants, fruits, you have a ton of things that have to be trimmed away, evil parts, so to speak. And you don't know what kind of vintage you have until 50 years later. And there gets to be a certain point where after a few decades, you know you will never get the right product out of a particular line of the plant. And you have to destroy it. And you have to destroy it because it can actually corrupt the rest of your vineyard. It has to be cast into the fire. You can see the imagery here is very applicable to the Christian life, to what the church ought to do with heretics and so forth, what we ought to do with sin. St. Paul, you know, he talks about, you know, you're better to go to heaven with your arm cut off if it causes you to, your hand cut off if it causes you to sin and so forth. This is all very horticultural stuff, which corresponds to the context of what Christ is saying. You don't know the fruits of something until many years later. So you can't say, well, somebody went to Medjugorje and they had a conversion. Look at all the fruits. Well, throughout those first 50 years, there are good fruits and bad fruits. But really, over time, what you're going to find is the ultimate production value of those fruits. We're not even 50 years from the beginning of Medjugorje, so we can't even say for certain how bad it's going to be. But to this point, we know it's extremely bad. And again, amongst these bad trees, there will be good fruits that, before the thing is fully mature, come off of these things. But eventually you have to cast the thing into the fire. And Medjugorje one day will have to be cast into the fire because it's an evil tree. So let's go into some of this. So I'm going to bring up some information here from this book that I showed you a few minutes ago. So again, I've copy and pasted here. You can do that with a book, by the way. Just use your iPhone. Go to Aruka Press and get the full book. I recommend it. Dr. K's forward is wonderful, as well as and it's an exhaustive study. So this is from a part in the book where they're talking about these things. So, by their fruits, the most common argument of the defenders of Medjugorje is that the fruits of the events in Medjugorje prove that Our Lady is appearing there. Those who know a little more than the pilgrims who come to Medjugorje say, the fruits of the staunchest defenders of Medjugorje that they themselves do not believe in the apparitions. If all the quote-unquote ugly things could be made public, then surely the answer would be clearly negative to everyone. This is a reference to the statement from one of the bishops there, saying that the ridiculous scandals that you can find out aren't even the full story of it. Yet Fathers Laurentin, Rupčić, Vlasic, Barbaric, and others, these are men associated. Father Laurentin was a storied scholar who was a Marian scholar who defended Medjugorje, and he was a huge charismatic, by the way. He wrote a book called Catholic Pentecostalism in, I think, 1977. They meticulously hide the truth. And you can actually find, there's another book written by a gentleman named Foley, which I believe is from Angelical Press. I've been reading through that one as well. And you can actually find detailed, transcribed statements of the theologians and seers involved and the priests involved in Medjugorje, telling the bishops and so forth, don't publish this thing, meaning don't let this thing get out. There's a lot of scandal and cover-up from behind the scenes. If the defenders of Medjugorje come across someone who is skeptical of the apparitions, they quickly isolate this person, accuse him of something, or declare him mad. This happened to a man, Jean-Louis Martin. The majority of the pious public has naively fallen victim to the great propaganda, the talk of the apparitions and of healings. These people themselves have become the greatest propaganda for the events. They do not even stop to think that the truth has been hidden by deliberate falsehoods. They are unaware that not even one miraculous healing has occurred that could have been verified by competent experts and institutions such as the Bureau Médical de Lourdes. No one knows of anyone healed from Herzegovina. Everyone knows that little Daniel, old Jozo Vasil, Venka Bracic, and others cited in the first books about Medjugorje were not healed. So there were allegations of healing, and these things never happen. So we're going to go over one of these failed healings here. And you got to understand something as well before we do this. Even with Lourdes, people will say, I went to Lourdes and I was healed. Even with Lourdes, there are actually very few documented, approved, miraculous healings associated with it over the long period of time. This is not to say that people don't go there and don't experience things. But when we're talking about real established healings that have to do with a miraculous nature, there is a process that must be undertaken. And just like you're supposed to do with apparitions and revelations and so forth, you're supposed to bring this to the competent authorities, and they're supposed to deal with this. And in fairness, even since the Second Vatican Council, up until very recently, the stipulations for how to deal with apparitions and revelations and miracles and so forth, it was actually very sound. You could still trust it. It's been rewritten recently by Pope Francis's henchman in the Vatican. But it's actually a very high bar. And these things that people say from Medjugorje, I went there and my cancer was healed. Well, here's the thing, my friends. There's a reason why there's a process of investigation, because you can find this in the scriptures, and the fathers talk about this, where that some of the people the disciples will come to Christ and say they were using your name, but they weren't one of us, and miracles still happen. And the fathers will say, well, things can happen in a variety of circumstances. When you invoke the name of Jesus with faith, and sometimes even in non-Catholic groups, there could be something miraculous happening as a confirmation of the truth of the religion to push people to conversion. So many people could go to any place on earth with great piety and really believe and really pray hard, and there could be a individual miraculous event attributed to that sort of faith that they had and this petition they made to God. And this could happen for people. But there's a very big difference between a miraculous intervention from God in the general sense of someone with great faith. You know, Christ tells us you can move mountains with your faith, that sort of thing. And an actual miraculous healing associated exclusively with the miraculous character of a particular apparition location like Lourdes. Those are not the same thing. Many, many, many people have had healings that attributed to saints and so forth, but not all of those have been approved. That doesn't mean that the people weren't healed, but you can't say that the church says those things are part of the actual thing in question. So with Medjugorje, what we have are testimonies of people. And granted, God will be merciful to us in our ignorance. We may believe something about an apparition location that's not true, and that will be a genuine belief, and it will inspire us to great piety. But this is not proof of the apparition itself. Our experience is not proof that the thing is true. To say that our experience proves that something is true is to fall into the errors of modernism, specifically with vital immanence. This notion that something that is close to you, that is natural in you, that comes alive because of your experience and your belief is proof of religion. This means that all religions are true. And in fact, the so-called Our Lady of Medjugorje, the Gospa, has said things like that. You know, all religions are pleasing to God and so forth. So when people might say, well, Kennedy, why would good things happen at all? Again, you have to understand the sort of demonic psychology. The devil knows he won't get everybody. He's not going to get every single soul. This is impossible. He can't beat God. So he will allow certain things to take place in the long run, in the sort of long schemes that he has. So if hordes of people want to flock to Medjugorje and some of them have conversions, that's great. And I've heard stories of people having conversions at Medjugorje, meaning they sort of had a deepening of their piety. But I've also seen it with many people who've gone to Medj and they talk about this amazing, miraculous experience, but then their lives, there's no increase in holiness. There's an obsession with Medjugorje, but it's not like this person goes to Medj and comes back and they're, you know, Saint so-and-so. They're just a Catholic who had an experience and for a time they prayed the rosary and so forth, but then it fell off. That happens all the time. It happens when people go to charismatic events at Steubenville and so forth. You know, they quote unquote rest in the spirit or whatever, and they come back and they're all on fire. And then a year later, they're shacking up with their boyfriend. For a true conversion, it has to be lasting and has to be tested. Many people will tell you of family members and friends who've gone to Medjugorje and come back inspired. And in short order, they embrace some sort of modernist heresy, or they even just don't practice the faith anymore, even though they were on fire for 18 months or something. So even the notion that there are so many conversions, well, again, what are you converting to? Because we're going to go through why there's a massive amount of evil that has come out of Medjugorje that the Medjugorje supporters at least have to overlook or they have to embrace. So if somebody is having a conversion to the faith, but then they're embracing these evils that are against the church and so forth, which we're going to see, this isn't even really a conversion. I mean, people will say that, for example, people will say that they've converted away from drug addiction because of some evangelical preacher. Well, yes, they changed their life, but it's not actually a conversion because they're not in the church and they can't save their soul. So even this term conversion has to be used more precisely. Anyway, we're going to go over this failed healing here. And then after I'm done that, we're going to go through the wicked, wicked, wicked fruits of Medjugorje. Wicked, wicked, awful, awful, anti-Catholic, satanic fruits that have been going on for a long time. But you're going to have to sign up to hear the rest of that. So check the link in the description after I get through this portion here of this failed healing. So I'll bring this up here. This is from a portion in the book. Again, you can use your phone, and if you ever want to do this, just copy and paste by doing a picture, and then it's great. You can use this on your podcast if you have it. So again, the book is from Aruka Press. The link for that is in the description box. So this is from a section in Michael Davies' book. It's about promises of healings that are characteristic of the events. When they don't occur as promised, then they are denied because they were never taped or written down on paper. There have been many promises that have ended tragically. What interests us is whether or not Our Lady is giving these promises or whether or not they are brought up by the quote-unquote seers. The tragic end of Marko Blažević, as described by the retired Archbishop of Belgrade, Monsignor Turk, says much regarding promises of healing. The Archbishop wrote on the 22nd of May, 1984, this is about 3 years after the beginning, that he was received as a patient of the cardiology clinic at the Belgrade Hospital. He was given the bed that was previously occupied by Marko Blažević of Buna, near Mostar, who was to go in for an operation. Mr. Blažević told the Archbishop and many other patients, doctors, and hospital staff that Our Lady had promised through the seers that the operation would succeed. A nun who assisted in the operation wrote to me later, this is Michael Davies talking, that Blažević's wife and his daughter spoke to her with a fanatical type of faith in Our Lady's promise. A certain doctor was also convinced by the promise. The patient did not wake up after the operation. During the operation, a group of patients prayed fervently outside the doors of the operating room. Many spoke of this incident, which left many disappointed and ashamed before atheists and people of other faiths. Father Vlasic, in his typical fashion of hiding the truth, there's a whole history of that, succeeded in convincing the daughter of the late Mr. Blažević to go to the bishop and tell him that Our Lady only told him to pray, not that she promised them that the operation would succeed. I told her not to make a liar out of her late father or liars of the others to whom he spoke. This is just one example, and this is going on in the very beginning. Most people don't know these things. They don't go into these things. They just talk to somebody who comes back from Medjugorje and is on fire, and it's like, I had a limp and it's healed or whatever. Again, healings can happen because of God granting you a miraculous thing to convert you to the true faith or to confirm you. Also, the church fathers are clear that the devils can feign miracles. First, and in addition to that, the power of the mind is very strong. I mean, this is why people flock to New Age things. People will literally, get into the whole notion of manifesting and so forth, and they will experience legitimate changes in their physiology and in their bodies. The power of the mind is very strong. This is why placebos work. I mean, there's plenty of research. There's plenty of research of people having been given placebos, and they work, 20, 30% of the time. The power of the mind is very strong. So this is why the church always has to investigate these things properly. Not just because in this case, for example, it's a failed healing, a failed promise that was allegedly of Our Lady, which was then covered up, as they do. But because we really don't know what happens with these certain things. We don't know. And we have to have the discretion and the investigation of the church. And as we'll see, the priests at Medjugorje that have been dealing with this stuff since the beginning, it's been constant rejection of any legitimate intervention of the church. And we're going to go into that now. So if you want to see the rest of the evil fruits of Medjugorje and the insanity of the secrets, we're going to go through some of the secrets as well. Click the link in the description box for subscribing for the Substack or YouTube memberships. I recommend the Substack only because I also do other things on there. Audio only, for example. So if you're somebody who wants to listen to audio only for paid episodes, you got to do that. It populates to iTunes and Spotify once you sign up. And also sometimes I put articles and things like that. So I've got some information coming forward. I'm going to be doing some interviews with people who lived in covenant communities in the charismatic renewal. They have some crazy stories to tell for a lot of reasons. Obviously, people want to be anonymous, so it's going to be sort of transcribed into article format. That's going to be in the Substack. You're going to sign up. Also, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to start writing my charismatic book, and previews of that will be available for paid subscribers in the Substack. So you get more bang for your buck, but if you're just a YouTube person, no problem. You'll get the full video of this if you sign up for YouTube. So we're going to go behind a paywall. So hopefully I'll see you on the other side. Thank you for all of you who have signed up. And for the rest of you, thanks for showing up, and I will see you next time.